Hello and welcome to the Good Society Forum. My name is Emma Skye and I'm Director of Yale World Fellows and co-host of the Good Society Forum, which is a community of change makers around the world with a common quest to build the good society. My co-host is Nizam Uddin of the Prince's Trust and a 2019 Yale World Fellow. Niz.
Hey Emma, thank you so much. And hello everybody. Thank you for joining us for what is now our 12th webinar as part of the Good Society Forum. You are all very welcome. Thank you again for being part of our community. And that is what you are. You're members of our community. Very low threshold for membership. By joining, you are now part of it. We would love for you to follow us on our social media platforms. We are on Twitter at Good Soc Forum. We're on LinkedIn. We have a company page, Good Society Forum, and we also have a group on Facebook. We are very keen to build a good society. We've seen things happening around the world, which makes all of us really frustrated and sometimes just think about how can we do more. If you do have ideas about how we can build a Good Society Forum, or wish to be a panelist, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is info@goodsocietyforum.com. All of those information will be shared on the chat function for you to contribute to throughout. Today's plan is to hear from our three speakers and take your questions. So many of you will have been here before and you know what the drill is right now. We want to know who is participating in today's webinar. If you could kindly share the city you are currently residing in and taking part in our webinar, we would love that. Please do click on the chat function. Fantastic. We have Dr. Rashid from Yemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Etim from Nigeria. Michelle Rentner from Brussels. Thank you again. And Michelle, you may have joined one of our webinars, and we're very thankful. From Hamden in Connecticut, Newtown, Connecticut. Heather from New York in the USA. John Forrest, hello, from Hertfordshire in the UK. We have Kirsten from New York. Ali, thank you again for joining us. Vienna by way of Erbil. We have Kirsten, thank you so much again from New Haven. We have Renee from New York. We have Cote d'Ivoire, Mexico, Nigeria. Komal, we're excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us from New York City. We are so fortunate. Every one of our webinars, we have absolute brilliant coverage from across the world. Livia from Bogota in Colombia. Wu Wei Du from New York by way of East London, which is where home is. Thank you, Wei. That's especially powerful for me. And Tim from Cambridge in Massachusetts. Thank you all for joining us. Our community is truly global. Our issues are always very global, and today will not disappoint. Emma, what are we talking about today?
Well, millions of young people have seen their lives disrupted because of measures taken by governments to protect their citizens against COVID-19. So many are not able to go to school, see their friends, or take exams. And early research is already showing that even short absences from schooling will have a lasting impact on achievement. But how about those young people across the world who are in vulnerable situations that required additional support before COVID? What additional measures are being taken to support already marginalized young people to prevent a further loss of a generation? So today we're going to hear from experts in South Asia, South Africa, and the Middle East of the efforts underway to work with young people in different vulnerable contexts. Now, our first guest is Mamoon Abdul Muqtada, Senior Program Manager for Save the Children in Bangladesh, who is working with the Rohingya in Cox's Bazar. Now, he's been working in the education sector for 27 years, including with Concern Worldwide and UNICEF. His particular expertise is curriculum development, teacher professional development, large-scale education program development, and program management. Mamoon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So I would like to start. So before going to the slide, I would like to give a background, very short background of Rohingya refugee. You know, in August 2017, around 1 million refugees, I mean the Rohingya population living in North Rakhine state fled to Bangladesh when a sectarian violence happened in North Rakhine state. And they are living in 2 sub-districts of Cox's Bazar district in in Bangladesh, and they are living some temporary settlement set up by different international organizations and also government of Bangladesh. So out of this 1 million population, so there are around 55% of population is fall under the age of 0 to 24. That is, which we call them actually children. So today I'm just going to give you a presentation where I actually divided this presentation in 2 parts. One is the education feature before COVID-19 situation and the education feature once COVID-19 situation happened in mid-March 2020. So please tell me, can you see this slide from your end? Hello?
Not yet, Mamoon.
Not yet? Oh, okay, let me. Okay. I think it is visible now.
It's visible now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in this, there are 13 slides. So don't take it unlucky 13. So I think it would be lucky anyway. So I will give you some statistics here in the second slide. You can see there are 2 types of learning centers in the Rohingya camp. One is we call temporary learning center. Another one is community-based learning facilities. So around 6,080 learning centers are there. And in those learning centers, 364,000 students are attending. And out of them, 38,846 from the host community. And total refugee students, among the refugee students, 159,801 are girls, which is actually less than the boys. And the host community, the boys proportion is a bit high. So the following slides, you can see the age ranges, and in the refugee community, the highest range is 6 to 14 age group. But in the host community, it is the 4 to 5 years age group is the highest proportion. So these are some of the statistics of Rohingya refugees. And now I would like to go to the feature of the education when we actually first started education program in late 2017. And though I am sharing, I am representing from Save the Children, but I will give the presentation of whole education sector working different agencies here in Cox's Bazar. So in this slide, you can see there are 32 national and international organizations have been implementing education activities for the refugees. And there are, as I already mentioned earlier, 2 types of learning facilities: static center-based facilities. This is one stored learning center or 2 or 3 running in 2 or 3 shifts. And another one is community-based home or home-based learning center. So the feature is like that guideline for informal education program, which is endorsed by the government. It is running level 1 and 2. Level 1 and 2 is comprising grade 1 to 4. And before that, the sector developed one learning competency framework. In short, it is LCFA. So this is up to level 5. But government only endorse up to grade level 1 and 2. The major subjects are English, mathematics, science, life skill, and Burmese. And the children alone in the facilities have learning materials like workbooks, storybooks, according to their level. And teachers have some of the materials like teacher's guidebook, workbook, storybook, etc. And but the materials development is still under process. There are, I already mentioned, there are 2 or 3 shifts learning center, and children attend in different contact hours, like children from 4 to 6 age group, they attend in the learning center for 1.5 hours, and children from 7 to 12, they attend 2 to 20 hours. And in 2 shifts learning center, children attend for 3 hours. Medium of classroom instruction is English, and use of Bangla is strictly prohibited. So one point I should have to share with you, The Rohingya people speak a local dialect very close to Chittagonian and Cox's Bazar dialect, which is close to Bangla as well, but they can't use this Bangla. Neither refugee teacher nor the host community teacher. And mostly learning centers supported by UNICEF and UNHCR, and some international agencies like Save the Children, Plan and World Vision have their other sources of fund. And we have been running those learning centers for more than 2 years. And in late 2018, we did one test called SR test for children competency on English, Burmese, and math. And you can see one classroom where a girl child is facilitating a session showing some picture to her fellow classmates. And another big thing is going on here in Cox's Bazar. It is teachers' professional development, and Save the Children in partnership with UNHCR and UNICEF is working on that. They, Save the Children, developed a teachers' competency framework, and under this framework, Save the Children will reach the master trainer working in 32 agencies here in Cox's Bazar, and they will cascade this training among the teachers. Due to the COVID situation, this in-house training component has totally stopped now. So we are converting those training modules into e-learning session. And another thing is that the complete teachers' professional development will be based on e-monitoring system, and UNICEF is supporting us to develop this e-monitoring system. So these all are the feature of the education, and major challenges we faced before the COVID, that is delay in obtaining government approval. We call it foreign donation 7 form. If you get a direct fund from other countries, you need a FD7 form. But those who are working with UNICEF and UNHCR, they don't need this FD7. So it is only for the agencies who actually directly get funded from other countries. And unavailability of qualified teachers. This is happening here in Cox's Bazar since the refugee came here. Mostly the college-going students, they became the teachers. They are not professionally trained. So that's why we call them unqualified or less qualified teachers. Lack of formal education structure, which I have shared earlier, that is the learning competency framework and guideline for informal education. This is not very structured. It's kind of interim arrangement for the children. And less of contract hours. So we believe that the contract hour is not that much sufficient for the children. No education for boys population over 14 years. For very less boys attending the learning center because they don't have their appropriate curriculum here in the refugee camp. And medium of instruction is English and Burmese. So refugee teachers, they can speak some Burmese, but still it is colloquial dialect, and English is not that much standard for both the teachers. And curriculum approval from government is also a challenge. And children don't have any textbook. And recently, government and UNICEF agreed to transition this system to Myanmar curriculum piloting. We call it MCP, and which is supposed to be started from April, but due to the COVID situation, it is delaying. So UNICEF is going to start some secondary schools following the Myanmar curriculum. So this is another challenge to make a transition between the learning competency-based framework curriculum and Myanmar curriculum. And then the COVID-19 is a big challenge, you know. So now I am going to say something about the COVID-19. So I just quoted one of the verse from one of our colleague working Save the Children. She recently published an article in Asian Age and one of the Bangladeshi national dailies. She just quoted here that the LCS and child-friendly spaces closed and may be repurposed for medical use if the need arises. Rohingya children are now not only at risk of COVID-19, but will have faced this challenge without access to their regular support system or safe spaces for play and education. And now I'm going to show something how we are going to overcome those challenges. It's basically from Save the Children perspective, but it is applicable for all across the sector. That is, we have developed some community messages like hand washing, stay at home, maintaining physical distance, etc. Our community volunteers just passing this message to the community. And we have a kind of distance mode of mental health and psychosocial support program. And we developed some guideline for carer-led education, workbooks and assignment. And we have one peer education program. The elder children who have leadership capacity in the classroom and advance in learning, he or she is tutoring 2 or 3 fellows. So it's supposed to be held every day, but due to the COVID situation, we are running this peer education program once a week, and it is going on. Other than this peer education program, all learning centers are closed right at the moment. And recently, Save the Children got a fund from ECW. It's about $600,000. It's for distance education. So there are two parts in this program. One is e-learning for the teachers and radio instruction for the children. And Save the Children is running one tele question and answer session every day for the teachers. One of the experts sitting on in one end, and the teachers ask question on pedagogy and other things. And home visit by Rohingya volunteer teachers, and moving towards technology-based education. So these are the way forward to overcome the challenge of COVID, but these are not enough. We need a kind of coherent and concentrated effort. Thank you.
Mamoon, thank you so much for that. Very comprehensive, and I know there was a lot for you to cover, and you managed to do it in the right time. So really appreciate it, and look forward to hearing from you when we go for Q&A. So if you do have any questions around what we have just heard, I really do encourage you to put your comments and your thoughts into the chat function, please. So up next, we have our next speaker, Joe Elias, a humanitarian and peace-building professional who leads their Ahlan Simsim program management team at Sesame Workshop, focused on supporting the early childhood development needs of Syrian refugees in the Middle East. Joe is himself the child of Lebanese refugees. He has worked with refugee women and children in Lebanon, Nigeria, and Australia. Joe, we are so grateful for you to have joined us and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. It's really fantastic to be here. I'm really, I live in New York, but as a Lebanese Australian, I can't help but firstly acknowledge the time and the space we're in, the difficulties and challenges around COVID-19, but also the racial justice reality that is happening right now. So I first wanted to start off with that. And so thank you so much for letting me speak. So as Nizam mentioned, my name is Joe Elias. I work for Sesame Workshop, which is a dream come true, a place whose mission is to make kids smarter, stronger, and kinder. Everyone kind of wants to be able to do something like that, and I work with some phenomenal people. The genesis, I'll do something very similar to Mamoon and kind of just briefly talk about how we got to this point for the Ahlan Simsim project or program, and that's the one that I'm focused and working on. And that is that we have been funded by the MacArthur Foundation. We received funding at the beginning of 2018, and we're working with phenomenal partners. Our implementing partner is the International Rescue Committee, or the IRC, and our research partner is New York University, NYU, the Global Ties Center. And the reason we're all together working in the Syrian refugee response space is to really do three things. The three pillars of our program is, one is to create amazing and useful content that's very much Sesame kind of focus, but also uses the wonderful imagery and Muppets and the joy and the smiles that you all know of Sesame Street in whichever part of the world you may have grown up in, and to kind of create this new show called Ahlan Simsim, which means Welcome Sesame, wonderfully enough. And with this show, we did a lot of preparatory work. We worked with in-region specialists in early childhood development, early childhood education, psychology, social and emotional welfare. And one of the key aspects of the development of the work is this educational framework, which we all work together to create. And that was an educational framework where the curriculum would focus on social and emotional learning. And so all of the seasons, and we've just actually just finished airing season 1 of Ahlan Simsim on NBC3, which is a pan-Arab broadcaster in the Middle East region, and reaches around 20 countries. And we had 26 episodes. They all featured emotions and feelings, how to identify them, how to manage them. There are songs, there are games, there are human adults that are there to kind of help with all of that identification and management of social and emotional and feelings. And so it was a really huge effort to get to the point of creating the curriculum and the scripts with our in-country advisors, technical advisors, and then to create it with our in-region production company in Jordan, where we worked specifically with the production company there. And so as that's one of that's our first pillar around creating this this show, but very, very much connected to the other two. And the second one is the direct service work that is being phenomenally spearheaded by the International Rescue Community, by IRC. And a lot of their work is directly in the 4 countries that we're working in, which is Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. And in Syria, we're working in northeast and northwest Syria. So in those 3 countries in the 2 regions in Syria, we are working with the IRC to roll out caregiver-facing programs, as well as child-facing programs. And what's being done in those spaces is exciting and dynamic, and in fact the integration of the Ahlan Simsim content into the everyday and the every kind of fiber of the programming in those countries is something that we're really excited about, not only because we believe in it, but because we have a very robust research and impact evaluation kind of arm, which brings in the NYU kind of space. And so that's our third pillar, which is advocacy and research. So we are hoping to at least double the research on early childhood development in the humanitarian setting through this Ahlan Simsim program by really looking at the qualitative and quantitative impact of social and emotional learning, the focus through Sesame workshop characters, to kind of see what can be done. And I should just quickly say before I move on to how we're adapting this for COVID-19, and that is that we have some exciting new characters that have joined the Sesame world, Sesame Street world, and they were created specifically for the Syrian refugee response space that we're in. One of them, she's a purple monster. Her name is Basma, means smile, and she's from here, wherever here is. And our second new Muppet is Chard, and Chard is a yellow monster, and he's not from here. And we wanted to kind of make it someone from here and someone not from here to kind of give that universal experience of, that experience that all children have and all of us have, so that we can, be not only supportive to refugee communities in the region, but also host country communities, because everyone is getting to watch and enjoy the Sesame Ahlan Simsim program. And so what I want to say about the COVID-19 work that we've been doing is that just like what Mamoon said in the Rohingya context, our direct service delivery work has had to be postponed right now too. And the way in which we've dealt with that is twofold. Firstly, with our direct service work, we've been creating WhatsApp messages to all of the beneficiaries and the community members that are involved through our work. And that includes COVID-19 awareness raising messages. So we've created about 7 of those where we're talking about how you can simply protect yourself and your family with hand washing and other things, sneezing into your arm or the crook of your arm, as well as hand, and being safe and keeping the distance where you can. And we've also been creating caregiver and child well-being messages, so really focusing and leaning into the social and emotional learning and making sure that there are resources around managing that. We've also got ECD awareness, raising messages, and activity-based programming. And finally, I wanted to say that we also created a family special called Friends Time, which aired on NBC3 and on YouTube, and you can find that on YouTube, as well as on our website, Ahlan Simsim, AHLANSIMSIM.org, for all of our different content, as well as some of the COVID PSAs and related content that we've created. So thanks.
Joe, thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear about the progress of Ahlan Simsim, Basma and Chard and all the puppets. Really amazing. And we will post the links to your program. Our next guest is Joy Olivia, who is a social entrepreneur working against inequality and poverty. And she's co-founder of Ikamva Youth in South Africa, which is an education non-profit that enables disadvantaged youth in townships to pull themselves and each other out of poverty and to get into further and tertiary education. And Joy is a 2018 Yale World Fellow. Joy, lovely to have you join us.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining and for inviting me. I'd like to share about two initiatives that I'm involved in and really focus on the responses to COVID-19. So Emma outlined Ikamva Youth. It's an after-school tutoring program where university students, most of whom used to be learners in the program before, spend their time to volunteer in small group tutoring, career guidance, and yeah, psychosocial support in terms of helping learners in high school to graduate each year and to achieve their final year and to then access either tertiary education, employment, or learnerships. Ikamva Youth responded very quickly to the state of national emergency. I can't take any credit for any of this, I should say up front, because I handed over leadership of Ikamva Youth before I came to Yale. So the team has been amazing. As the state of national emergency was announced, they moved quick to get as much printed material out to the learners as possible before everything was shut down and we were under lockdown. They've then really leveraged WhatsApp, which is incredibly exciting for me. You know, there's always pressures to scale and to leverage technology, and I'm sure a lot of people here know about how complicated that is in under-resourced areas. But WhatsApp is really proving to overcome a lot of the access and illiteracy and data and device requirements that were prohibitive previously. So what they've done is moved their face-to-face small group tutoring into online WhatsApp groups. And as a result, have been able to leverage many more volunteers and to keep going with what they're doing, supporting learners to get through their schoolwork while they're at home. And they've used all kinds of super innovative ways of doing that, including actually getting the teachers from school to join, make videos, hold classes. So they've added curriculum development into their tutoring offering, and they're finding surprisingly good levels of uptake, participation, and engagement. The ability to track that is super interesting. So from an M&E perspective, this is really interesting. And they found interesting things like the grade 12s, who were previously really difficult to get hold of because they were so oversubscribed in terms of having to be at school and other engagements. They're now able to be in touch with far more than before. And so they're actually hopeful that they'll have even better results with that cohort than they have historically, which is really interesting. I think, yeah, in general, I've just been interested in how the more nimble, adaptive and flexible organizations have been able to respond. And I've noticed a trend where it's the organizations that have a real connection with young people and families that have been able to move most speedily, because they've already got all those, the web of contacts is already established, the trust is already there, and it's the first port of call that learners have gone to help them to overcome the challenges of not being able to go to school, not being able to access curriculum or content or support. So that's been incredibly encouraging, and I think it's actually going to significantly shift the model. I was speaking to the executive director this afternoon, and he was describing really exciting things that they're thinking in the way that this model can be used for an additional offering post-COVID-19 and as a way to scale beyond areas that are close to tertiary institutions, because the model has previously been limited in that communities within 40 kilometers of a tertiary institution can be served, because the volunteers are mostly university students. So yeah, so it's very exciting to see what's been happening there. And then the other initiative that I've been pulled into that just is a response to COVID-19 is something driven by the Western Cape government, which is looking at learners in primary school in grades 1 to 5, and essentially trying to get printed resources out to learners who don't have devices or internet access and are too young to mediate their own learning. So we did a very fast sprint, and we made this sweet book. We collaborated with an artist and some characters that already exist in some other very sweet books and plays, and we made a book that's essentially an at-home activity pack for young people to play with their siblings and their families. So the cover is a board game. It's let's beat COVID-19, and you make your way through. It's essentially just putting the messaging through of all the ways in which we can deal with the pandemic. And yeah, in designing this, we had to keep it as low cost as possible. So the whole thing costs 18 cents a copy to print, and the inside has a range of activities from let's grow our minds, let's learn from each other, to let's make a tippy tap and let's make a mask. And the characters kind of tell stories and sing songs through the way. There are little activities around psychosocial support and reflection. And so we tried to strike the balance between being an educational resource, but mostly just a way for the people at home to connect and to support each other. And really, I mean, as a parent of a small child, the pressures of trying to work and parent at the same time are really tough. And so we're really just hoping to help parents out as well by giving the kids stuff to do. So there's been a wonderful response to it. It's been distributed across the country now. It's being translated into 4 more languages, and it's available. I'll post the link if anybody wants to rework this for your own context. You're most welcome. I've been really encouraged by how speedily people are in the sector in terms of their response to be able to collaborate and to innovate. Decision making is so much faster. Working with government is faster than I've ever experienced. And so while, of course, this is an incredibly challenging time and the inequalities that existed before are going to be exacerbated, I do think that there are silver linings, which I hope we can carry on through, and that the urgency in responding to the inequalities in education and the challenges that children face in under-resourced areas can be kept in terms of the level to which we are focusing on this response.
Joy, thank you so much. That presentation gave me joy, and I want that game. I really would love it, actually. So I'm just going to invite back Mamoon and Joe, and thank you for those who have already sent in questions. We please continue sending your questions, your comments. Brilliant. We have our panelists. So my first question is actually, Joy, you just mentioned something which was highly resonant around being able to pivot, and you talked about using WhatsApp, using a board game. I'm really keen to know, because obviously the work that you all do is in environments that are not necessarily stable, and the privileges that we have in other countries in terms of stability, whether it's buildings or infrastructure. What are some of the concrete ways in which you've had to innovate to get messages across? And has COVID in any way changed that, or were you already doing that beforehand? So maybe Joe, I can come to you first, if that's okay.
Okay, sure. I think that there's been ways of communicating that happened before, which has made these various projects more resilient and able to carry on. It's interesting in that the government has come to community-based organizations to support them in reaching families. And not just for educational resources or for connecting, but for getting food out to people. So a lot of these packs are actually, it's been quite eye-opening for me that that the fact that these organizations have relationships on the ground are the reason that they're able to respond to a crisis like this, and that it's a capacity that the government doesn't have. And so that's been interesting. And
thank you, Joy. And I need to be better at enunciating Joy and Joe. so Joe, if I can come to you now with the same question around the innovative ways beyond, I mean, the whole design of what you're doing. Beyond that, what are the different methods that you've adopted?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're extremely proud about is that we did a significant amount of what's called formative research to understand, does a TV show even make sense? How are people going to watch it? And so we really found out that over 90% of Syrian refugees in the communities that we're working with do have access to a data-enabled phone. And so we're trying to figure out the best ways to provide them with the content in ways that won't impact their data consumption, in ways that really there's a parcel of information that's already there. So what Joy was saying earlier around WhatsApp messaging is very similar to us, where we create these messages that have audio content on them, that have links to websites and to YouTube and our specific games and songs, so that if and they're actually targeted at age groups too. So Ahlan Simsim is targeted at for children 0 to 8, but the sweet spot for us is that 5 to 6 year old range. So we are conscious of who we're working with, family-wise, caregiver-wise, and understanding if someone has a 2-year-old, what would work for them. And so we're targeting with audio and visual content things that make sense, that make sense for those families and those children.
Thank you, Joe. And Mamoon, I mean, you've been working in this space for a very long time. I'd love to get a sense from you in terms of, especially the Rohingya community now, what are the different innovative practices you've adopted to try and get the message through to young people and meet them where they are? You're on mute, Mamoon.
I already mentioned in my presentation that we are going to start some distance education program, radio-based content for the children. This is not only pedagogic, but the other things like someone mentioned about social emotional learning, mental health and psychosocial sorts of things, and also how they can save themselves from this COVID situation. These are the things. But one thing I should have to mention here, I'm not quite sure in other countries, the refugee context, but here it is very restricted. You can't very easily use the technology inside the refugee camp. Even a few days back, it was banning using of mobile phone inside the camp. So it's still, we have some restriction to use this, but the agencies working here in Cox's Bazar, they are trying their best to convince government to allow and make it open to access to the technology. So we are working on that, and we, as I mentioned earlier, that the distance education program, we got the funding from ECW, and the government gave the permission to use this distance education modalities. So I think.
And Mamoon, if I can come to you, so Komal has asked a really important question around the importance of role of parents and family in the early childhood development. And I know you've mentioned having to adapt into different languages and contextually. So could you give us a sense of how, and we're talking about displaced families and they might not all be together, but how have you used families and parents in particular with your work with young people?
So before going to the answer of the question, I should have to give you some background. So ECCT was not a very good practice here in Bangladesh, and only the agencies, NGOs, they actually started some early childhood care and preschooling in the community. But it's a very big advocacy initiative from different agencies and government convenes, and only 7 to 8 years ago, government adopted this thing, and they include this early childhood care and education in the government primary school. But the question is that what I saw in Kamal, what he wrote, that when he found some problem between the community and the school in the school setup. So what we are doing to overcome this challenge, actually this ECCT should be very contextual, and it should be very relevant where the environment children are living in and the family they are from. So that's why the strong parenting session and very much relevant with their living condition and then what the stimulation they need from the school is very much linked in the parenting session. And it should not be very academic. There are some different sorts of children's early development should be there. So I think that the strong parenting is very important here, and we are doing that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's brilliant to hear that you've got separate sessions for the parenting element. Joy, if I can come to you and perhaps hear from you in terms of the work you've done with the entity that you founded around family and parental engagement.
That's always been key. And, you know, before COVID, we really focused a lot on parent engagement. For parents to avail their children after school, to relieve them from household chores and to come and spend time learning in the afternoons and on Saturday mornings and all through the school holidays. We had to really have very good relationships with parents to enable that to happen. That's also meant that now with COVID, the parents are much more trusting and willing to give over their devices to their children to use the WhatsApp service. And so that's been key in being able to be in touch and to get access. In terms of the this program for the younger children, the focus has really been on how do we get at-home learning to happen? How do we make learning fun? Given the legacy of apartheid and Bantu education in South Africa, we've got a massive gap in terms of a generation of education. And so kind of demystifying that, bringing in traditional games, bringing the fun and the collaboration and not being thwarted by the challenges of having to get through a big curriculum. It's been quite encouraging to me to see our education departments shrink the curriculum in response to COVID and increase the psychosocial, the connective, the supportive, the whole child development angle, which I think is so key pre, post, and post-COVID.
Joy, thank you. And Joe, if I can ask you something slightly a bit different in terms of working with families or generally, because I know you just in terms of the way you formed how you engage, there's a lot of research that goes into it. How are you measuring the impact, if you are, of working with families and with parents?
Oh, absolutely. So we're measuring our child-facing and caregiver-facing components, and so working with New York University, the Global Ties Center, we've developed a framework for essentially going into and directly sitting down with families and caregivers and asking them about their experience, and not ignoring the qualitative component. I know there was someone in the chat talking about, how do you really, ensure you absorb as much as you can from the lived experiences of those you're working with. And so we're trying to balance out the quantitative with the qualitative aspects of our research. And so a really significant and deeply important part of the program is measuring the impact of these programs, but also measuring the impact of the show itself. And so one thing is that's a key factor of the show is what we always do at Sesame, is that we create it so that it's a co-viewing experience. Kind of like what has been said earlier, it is something that you do with your child. It's something that actually kind of affects you as a caregiver as well, understanding and seeing the difference in what happens with your child. Are they saying, oh, I'm feeling this way, and this is a thing I can do. I can do some belly breathing. Like Basma, one of our characters, she teaches everyone to do belly breathing, and there's a song that goes with that. So they're the kind of things we're looking at from an impact evaluation perspective.
Thank you, Joe. And we have a question here about COVID from Samia in Tunisia, specifically looking at in terms of potentially a second wave that might come in. Or there's two questions here around COVID, so I'll combine them both. But Samia is asking, social distancing may further fuel stigma and discrimination against marginalized youth, and a sense of how, I guess the precursor to that is, how much has COVID, and we heard about some of the messaging that you're promoting, how much has COVID changed the way in which you're able to engage in some of these locations that you're working in? Do you have a sense of the impact it's had or it's having right now? And is that affecting your delivery specifically? So for example, issues of social distancing and issues of maybe access to clean water or other more practical measures associated with that. Mahmood, can I come to you first?
Yes, yeah, your question is very good question. But here, the Rohingya living in the place is very densely populated. So though we are trying our best to make this social distance, physical distance, but it is not working over there. But fortunately, at the same time, the affected people, I mean the COVID affected or COVID suspected people are very less compared to the population. There are 1 million people, and till now only 35 people got affected. So we, Save the Children and other agencies, we are trying our best to make this thing, but it is not happening over there. So that's why the question doesn't really come whether it is fueling any stigma, social stigma or not.
Thank you. And Joy, I have the same question for you, but then I want to add something else, which is, I was recently talking to a psychologist in a UK context and talking about how there were some communities who already had resilience from past trauma, and how that past trauma can be utilized to build resilience to things like new pandemics. So just thinking about COVID in particular, and how that has affected some of the young people or impacting them. Is there a relationship between something like COVID coming, but they've already got a past resilience in terms of building that up to some of the traumas that they would have had to go through, the trauma of a country post-apartheid, or the trauma of living in townships with deep issues of inequality?
Yeah, we've had massive challenges with HIV and TB. And so, we've kind of had a lot of this before, whether it's from a health response perspective, dealing with stigma, messaging to youth. A lot of the lessons that we've learned through those diseases have really helped. And I do think, it's a tricky one with resilience because, arguably some people build resilience as they experience more traumas and others don't, and it's really hard to know which way that's going to go. But I think in terms of the increase in psychosocial stuff, the feeling that we're in all of this together, and that people are, it's really interesting, isn't it, that the entire world, we're all experiencing this. I think with HIV and TB, even within South Africa, it was very limited, not limited, was massive part of the population, but not the entire population. And so this feels different in that it's everybody that's affected and impacted. I hope that we've learned, because we really, yeah, we made some big mistakes as a country in dealing with HIV and AIDS, and really had to learn some difficult, awful lessons in that way. And I do think that that experience has made us more resilient as a country, certainly in terms of policy making and the ways in which our leadership has responded.
Sure, thank you. And Joe, the same. So there's two questions that I'd love for you, your thoughts on. One around how has COVID and any measures that have had to be introduced as a result impacted delivery, and I know you operate in a different kind of mechanism. And secondly, consideration, has there any consideration been given to existing resilience because of the experiences that people have gone through, or even actually around inducing trauma from programming, for example? How have you factored that in?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and you know, we Syrians in the region experience their life as refugees different depending on where they are. You know, if they're internally displaced in Syria, they're experiencing it very differently to Syrians who are mostly in refugee camps in Iraq or in Lebanon, to Syrians who in Turkey, for example, are not in refugee camps at all. And so the experience of being pointed out or seen as a pariah or being like the vector for any issues is very different depending on where you are as a Syrian refugee. What we're very conscious of and aware of is that in the places where in refugee camps in Jordan and other places, that we're seeing that kind of like what Mamoun was saying, they have nowhere else to go, and they're quarantined. They're not allowed to leave their camps. And then and to that point, it's is it something where we can blanketly say that it's strengthening their resilience, or that they're being re-traumatized by having to only be in one space and not go anywhere else? That's something that we're looking at from a qualitative perspective, from a, you know, what is happening, not just in general for our overall program, but in this COVID-19 space, we're going to be looking at measuring the impact of our adapted methodology of working with the communities, and what does it mean to them in the full experience of their life.
Joe, thank you. And Joy, I'm going to come to you with a question. Something that Joe mentioned, and rightly so, was around what we're seeing across America right now in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and talking of racial justice. And the one thing that's been clear from the webinars that we've hosted and what we're seeing around the world is, you know, you said everyone in the world, effectively half of the world in one fell swoop were quarantined together, and there's an emboldened empathy. How much solidarity is there in terms of issues beyond what's happening, say, so in terms of your experience, how alert are young people in the context that you've worked into issues happening in, say, America or in other parts of the world?
I think what's happening in America right now is, yeah, it's the second pandemic. I mean, it's bringing to light a lot of the challenges that, you know, we have across the world. In terms of how in touch young people are with those issues, I don't think I'm well placed to say. I've been stuck in my house in Cape Town, and really just kind of connecting in my bubble. So yeah, it's really hard to know the extent to which this shared experience is both isolating us and connecting us. And it's also, I think, largely connected to how privileged we are as to the level to which we can connect with people outside of our homes, and get access to information about what's happening in the rest of the world. And so I think that divide, that digital divide, is a real impediment to us being able to feel the shared kind of connected experience of not only lockdown and responses to COVID-19, but yeah, the ways in which this is opening our eyes about all the problems and challenges that the world is facing.
Really well said, Joy, thank you.
Environments, yeah.
And Mamoun, if I can come to you with that question, and the reason why I ask it is for example, I've been receiving videos from friends who are Iraqi, who are affected by what's happening in Iraq, about riots happening in America. And there seems to be an emboldened empathy and awareness of the plight that people go through, and it's human suffering. So in the work that you've done, and it doesn't have to be about what's happening in America right now, I'm just interested in young people in particular. How alert are they to some of the other issues, if they have, of course, access? And Joy has rightly said, it's all about access and privilege to computers and systems. Is that something that you experience with your work in Cox's Bazar? You're on mute.
If I correctly understand, you are talking about the technology and how the young people will be influenced by this technology. Is it right?
Partly. How alert are they to the issues happening around the world?
Okay. So first of all, you know, the technology is actually for the benefit of the wider community, wider people. But you know, if you misuse those technology, then the law enforcing agency, government will actually endorse lots of embargo. Then you can't use. And it happened in Cox's Bazar early age, not after the influx in 2007. So you know, the refugee people are living here in Cox's Bazar since 1990. So they were not allowed to use any mobile phone and any laptop, etc. But nowadays things are changing, and there are I mean 3-4 years ago, there were not the law enforcing agency people present in the camp. But nowadays, you know, that people living in the camp, and you will see huge number of people moving around the camp, and they are actually taking care of whether any miscreants happen or not in the camp. So I think if young people, they allow to use those kind of things, they will not use that much in an event or any anti-social activities like that. If I correctly understand your question.
You did. And Mamoon, I'm going to come and ask you. So Andrew here has asked a question, as has Michelle Rentenar, around the vulnerability of young people in particular. So when they're in vulnerable positions, and we've heard countless horrific stories of grooming gangs on various horrific ways. How practically in the camps, and reading Michelle's question here specifically, how do you ensure there are designated safe spaces and protections given to prevent vulnerability being exploited in one end? And then I think secondly, I think Michelle's point was specifically COVID related. Are you thinking about a second wave of COVID hitting?
Okay, so miscreants are always there. So, but though they are very less in number, but bad people, though they are less in number, but they are very powerful. But you know, we have different activities over there other than education. Like we have child protection, and not only Save the Children, around 55 agencies are working on that. So the concentrated effort taken by the agency actually not led them to go this kind of miscreants or something like that. But some people, there are those who were, when they were in the North Rakhine state, they were belong to some of the insurgency group, and they're still active in the camp, but they are less in number, but they have some particular issues. But I'm in my 8 years experience, I think that they will not relate this antisocial activity with the COVID and things like that. So this is my experience. Thank you.
Mamoon, thank you. And Joe, if I can come to you with a similar minded question around COVID. So I think the question for Mamoon there was around how do we ensure vulnerabilities are not exploited? Is that something that you think about in the context of the work that you're doing, and how have you formed your response?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm very conscious of time. We're focused completely and utterly on social and emotional learning. And part of that, and a significant part of that, is about the skills to identify and manage your emotions in partnership with your family, caregivers, and those around you. And so those skills from the peace building perspective is what we focus on, and what we hope, and what we're hoping to measure protective factors when it comes to these kinds of situations.
Thank you. And Joy, I'm going to come to you with the question I'm going to ask everybody as a final question, We are a community of hope and builders of the good society. And Bushra here, who herself is incredible and a pioneer of education in the United Kingdom, has asked the question, what positive learning in the recent months will you take forward for young people post-COVID? And I know you've been stuck at home and not necessarily being in the front lines, but I mean, it may be a broader message of something that you've taken away from the COVID period around young people that we can all take solace in and joy from.
I think that what's been good about this is the focus that this crisis has sharpened in terms of the response of the people who are responsible for serving young people. And so I think that that's the thing that I'm taking, is that we can collaborate, we can innovate, we can mobilize resources, we can move faster, and that sense of urgency to deal with the disparities that existed before. It feels like this is a momentum that we can build on to have lasting change.
It's incredible how that echoes in so many other contexts and countries that we've heard across webinars. Joe, same question to you.
I would echo exactly the same thing as Joy, and just to also add that what we've learned is that our communities, our family members are extremely keen and really receptive to wanting to do something for themselves, for their kids, for their families, and for their community. They're really wanting to take on some of that responsibility, and that approach of being positively framed coming from a strengths-based approach is really working well in our context.
And Mamoon, if we can come to you lastly, what is giving you hope? One thing that is giving you hope right now that we can take away?
So I think the whole COVID situation has changed, and we will move around to the virtual arena. So this is my hope. And technology will have very big influential role within every society. So this is my hope.
Mamoon, Joe, Joy, thank you so much for everything that you do in your work. Thank you for joining us and for enriching us with such a wonderful conversation. We look forward to continuing our collaboration with you. Thank you to everybody that has joined in this conversation. This will go up on our website, the goodsocietyforum.com, not the goodsocietyforum.com, where you'll be able to listen. Emma, over to you.
So thank you to our panelists and to our audience. And please join us at the same time on Sunday, when we'll be exploring how art contributes to the good society. Thank you. Bye.